In the shadowed streets and candlelit parlours of Victorian England, a shocking and secretive practice unfolded. Men sold their wives, treating human lives as property, for profit, for desperation, for scandal. Behind the polished facades of industry and etiquette lay a world where love and loyalty were expendable, where morality bowed to survival. The stories of those sold, silenced, and shamed echo through history, revealing the dark underbelly of a society obsessed with appearances. Victorian England gleamed with industrial ambition. Smoke rose from factories, chimneys marking the progress of a modern empire. The streets buzzed with the wheels of progress, clattering carriages, and the calls of hawkers selling wares. Yet beneath this veneer of order and prosperity, a harsher reality festered. Poverty sprawled in back alleys, cramped tenements, and dimly lit courtyards. Families struggled to survive, and social pressures weighed heavier than the iron machines of industry. In this world, women were bound by law and custom. A wife's status was inseparable from her husband's. Her legal identity was subsumed, her autonomy limited, and her existence often considered property rather than personhood. Society demanded obedience, conformity, and sacrifice, especially from women. Economic dependence, social stigma, and rigid expectations created a landscape in which extreme solutions emerged, and the unimaginable became possible. Among these extremes was the practice of wife-selling. While shocking to modern sensibilities, it existed within a framework of legal loopholes, social tolerance, and desperate circumstances. Men, burdened by debt, debtors' prisons, or public disgrace, sometimes turned to the sale of their wives as a last resort. The transactions were often ceremonial, a hand clasped, a price named, blurring the lines between necessity and exploitation. The streets of London, Liverpool, and Birmingham bore witness to the paradox of the age, moral rigidity and human commodification existing side by side. Behind ornate parlours and lamplit drawing rooms, the pressures of survival twisted ethics into spectacle. It was a world where a wife could be auctioned like livestock, yet the public pretended not to see. The grandeur of Victorian society masked the desperation that drove these acts, a shadowy trade conducted in whispered corridors and backroom inns. And so, the stage was set, a society of contrasts, where progress and oppression coexisted, where morality bent to circumstance, and where the lives of women could be weighed, priced, and traded in the shadow of public respectability. The stories about to unfold would reveal not just the horrors of this practice, but the human faces trapped within it. In Victorian England, the law treated women as shadows of their husband's authority. Married women had little legal standing. Their property became their husband's, their income his to control, their very identity bound to his name. Divorce was rare, expensive, and socially stigmatized, leaving many women trapped in marriages they could neither leave nor escape. Economic dependence compounded the oppression. A wife without independent means was entirely reliant on her husband for food, shelter, and security. In households straining under poverty or debt, this dependence could become a dangerous bargaining chip. Society turned a blind eye, or worse, saw the arrangement as necessary. The moral compass of the age pointed outward, toward appearances and reputation, rather than inward, toward justice or empathy. These conditions normalized extreme solutions. When survival, debt, or shame threatened, the sale of a wife, though morally shocking, was legally ambiguous enough to occur. The practice existed in the cracks of the law, neither fully sanctioned nor explicitly forbidden, and often carried out with a ritualized formality that lent it an air of legitimacy. The public exchange, a hand clasped in agreement, a sum whispered, over the counter, transformed human life into a commodity, a transaction conducted as if the woman were livestock or property. Cultural norms reinforced the practice. Gossip whispered that the moral failings of women justified their transfer between households. Communities often tacitly accepted these exchanges, provided decorum was observed. A husband in financial ruin or desperate for social leverage could turn to wife-selling as a solution, relying on legal loopholes, social acceptance, and ritualized symbolism to protect himself from consequence. And so, Victorian society created an environment in which human dignity could be weighed, priced, and transferred. The law, culture, and economy intersected in ways that rendered women vulnerable to a commodification that was both public and secretive. The stage was prepared for the transactions that would shock the conscience of some, scandalize others, and leave countless women trapped in lives they had not chosen. The sale of wives was not merely rumor. It was a structured, ritualized, and sometimes public affair. Local inns, markets, or even the steps of parish churches became stages for transactions that blurred legality, custom, and spectacle. A husband would announce his intent, a price was set, and the handover, a handshake, a symbolic gesture, formalized what words could scarcely justify: the exchange of one human life for money or favor. Public auctions, though rare, left no ambiguity about the nature of the act. Bystanders watched as women were offered, appraised for youth, appearance, and perceived obedience. Humiliation accompanied necessity. Women were paraded as objects to be weighed against coin. Yet, even in private arrangements, coercion was central. A wife might consent outwardly to preserve her family or avoid violence, her compliance enforced by social and economic pressure rather than freedom of choice. The transactions were layered with symbolism. The clasped hand, a whispered price, and the ritual announcement were all designed to confer a sense of legitimacy. To the participants, the ceremony masked the moral gravity of the act, transforming desperation into ritual and shame into legality. The community, complicit through observation or gossip, reinforced the practice, turning each sale into both spectacle and warning. Behind the gestures, the emotional cost was immense. Humiliation, betrayal, and fear defined the women's experience. They became pawns in a system that valued social propriety above human dignity. Their lives were evaluated, auctioned, and transferred with the cold efficiency of commerce, yet each transaction carried the invisible weight of trauma, family disruption, and public scrutiny. Some sales were desperate acts of survival, others, calculated moves in social games, yet all revealed the dark underbelly of Victorian society, a world where poverty, debt, and rigid social norms conspired to commodify life itself. And as the ink dried on each written agreement, each whispered deal, one truth remained. In this society, appearances mattered more than humanity, and the consequences for those caught in the machinery of tradition were both personal and permanent. In the dimly lit inns and bustling markets of Victorian towns, individual stories of wife-selling unfolded like dark tales whispered among the cobblestones. Margaret, a young mother from Birmingham, found herself sold to a stranger to settle her husband's mounting debts. She clutched her children tightly, their cries muffled beneath her skirts, feeling the sting of humiliation that no apology or legal loophole could erase. The transaction was swift, a handshake, a whispered price, a life transferred as if she were a ledger entry. Then there was Thomas, a man driven by desperation rather than cruelty. Burdened with debt to ruthless creditors, he sought a buyer for his wife, believing the sale might provide a chance at survival. Yet even as he rationalized his decision, the look in his wife's eyes, equal parts fear and betrayal, haunted him. Each sale was a moral fracture, splitting families and reputations. with invisible cleaver strokes. Some women resisted, plotting quiet rebellions. Eliza, spirited and clever, feigned compliance while secretly appealing to friends and neighbors for assistance. On a fog-laden morning, she vanished from the public auction, escaping to a relative's home, leaving behind stunned spectators and a husband shamed before his peers. Rare victories like hers offered glimmers of hope, but also underscored how extraordinary resistance had to be, how dangerous and precarious survival truly was. Yet, not every story ended with triumph. Many women endured forced unions, public humiliation, or relentless abuse, their voices swallowed by societal indifference. The market reduced lives to currency, and each transaction echoed with personal tragedy. The tearing of bonds, the shattering of dignity, and the quiet, lingering despair of those trapped by circumstance. These stories revealed a Victorian society balancing on the edge of morality and survival. For every act of desperation, there was a ripple of consequences. Families fractured, reputations stained, and the spectre of scandal lurking in every whispered conversation. The lives behind the sales were hidden, yet they bore the brunt of a system that placed social convenience above compassion. The human faces of these transactions, so often overlooked, remind us that behind every legal loophole and ritualized gesture, there existed profound suffering. Moments of courage, despair, and fleeting triumph that revealed the fragile humanity in an otherwise ruthless system. Newsprint crackled in London parlours as pamphlets circulated, exposing the shocking practice of wife-selling to a wider audience. Moral reformers decried the trade as barbaric, arguing that it violated not just the spirit of the law, but the very essence of human dignity. Editors of newspapers splashed tales of these sales across columns, each story a moral indictment, igniting public outrage in tea shops, churches, and Parliament alike. Yet public reaction was complex. While some condemned the practice outright, others excused it as a necessary evil for families mired in poverty or men facing social ruin. Gossip and whispers filled drawing rooms, where the scandal was dissected in hushed tones. Reputation, rather than justice, often dictated responses. A man might be vilified for selling his wife, yet quietly admired for his pragmatism in saving his family from destitution. Debates raged in pamphlets and journals, questioning the morality of legality itself. Should a law that enabled human lives to be traded be tolerated in a civilized society? Advocates for women's rights began to draw attention to the structural injustices that rendered such sales possible, linking morality with economic reform and legal change. Slowly, the practice became both a symbol of oppression and a catalyst for social consciousness, prompting conversations that would reverberate through decades. The tension between private complicity and public morality created a landscape of contradictions. Communities witnessed transactions that violated conscience, yet persisted behind ritualized decorum. Men sought to navigate survival while preserving appearances. Women were caught in the crossfire, their dignity sacrificed to necessity and tradition. Ultimately, the public outcry illuminated the fragility of societal values, revealing how law, culture, and morality often collided in ways that left the most vulnerable exposed. The debate sparked by wife-selling became a lens through which Victorian society examined itself, confronting the limits of empathy, justice, and the human cost of appearances. Even as outrage grew, the shadow of these sales lingered, a reminder that moral reckoning often trails behind human suffering, and that change in society's conscience is slow, uneven, and hard-won. For the women caught in this merciless system, the consequences extended far beyond the sale itself. Humiliation was immediate and relentless. To be sold was to have one's dignity stripped in public, a private life displayed as spectacle. Their faces, once intimate and familiar within the home, were now scrutinized by neighbors, bystanders, and sometimes the press. The market for wives transformed women into commodities, and with each transaction came the bitter taste of objectification, a humiliation compounded by the whispers and judgments of a society that had sanctioned their suffering. Abuse was often both physical and psychological. Some women were subjected to harsh treatment from their original husbands as punishment for failure or disobedience. Others found themselves under the authority of strangers, men who had purchased them, whose interest in them extended only as far as the expectations of obedience and propriety. The invisible chains of dependence remained. Every command, every forced smile, every feigned gesture of compliance chipped away at the selfhood of those involved. Social ostracism magnified the trauma. A woman who had been sold risked exclusion from her community, from familial support, and even from her own children in some cases. Society's moral gaze was harsh, often blaming the victim for circumstances entirely beyond her control. To survive, many learned to mask emotions, to adopt a performance of compliance, or to retreat into silence. These coping mechanisms were necessary shields, but also sources of loneliness, alienation, and despair. The loss of identity was profound. Names, roles, and agency became negotiable. Some women were renamed, reshaped by the households they entered. Their personal histories were rewritten, erased, or ignored. Letters and testimonies, where they existed, hint at quiet resistance, small acts of reclamation, fleeting gestures asserting selfhood against a system designed to suppress it. These acts, hidden, private, and fragile, remind us of human resilience in the face of commodification. Yet amid suffering, some women found ways to endure. The stolen moments of kindness, the whispered confidences with sympathetic neighbors, the daring attempts at escape, all formed a quiet rebellion against the rigid transactional morality of the age. Their stories, though often overshadowed by scandal or obscured by history, carry lessons of courage, endurance, and the indomitable spirit that persisted even when society failed them. In the end, the consequences were not only personal, but systemic. Each sale reinforced the perception of women as property, perpetuating cycles of abuse and marginalization. The scars, both visible and invisible, remained long after the handshakes were exchanged, leaving indelible marks on the lives of those involved. The human cost of this practice is a testament to the cruelty, indifference, and moral contradictions of a society that valued appearances over dignity and expediency over empathy. The practice of wife-selling stands as a stark emblem of systemic oppression, a historical mirror reflecting the devaluation of human life in the pursuit of survival, reputation, or profit. It forces us to confront the consequences of a society that prioritizes appearances, legal loopholes, and social convenience over human dignity. Victorian England's dark trade left a legacy both tangible and symbolic. Families fractured, women were silenced, and communities learned to look away. Yet, within this tragedy, we also witness resilience. The stories of survival, rebellion, and quiet defiance illuminate the human spirit's capacity to endure and resist, even when ensnared in circumstances engineered by law and custom. These histories are more than curiosities. They are cautionary tales. They challenge us to reflect on the moral obligations of society, the value of human life, and the dangers of normalizing injustice for convenience or profit. They remind us that progress is not merely measured by industry, innovation, or empire, but by empathy, fairness, and the recognition of human dignity in even the smallest, most overlooked lives. As history fades from memory, the echoes of those sold, shamed, and silenced linger, urging reflection, demanding empathy, and leaving an indelible mark on our understanding of morality, justice, and resilience.